My name is Molly Martin. I'm 35, a major in the United States Army. 24 hours after I'd buried my husband, I came home to find the locks changed and our life stacked on the front lawn. My wedding photos lay face down in the wet grass. My combat medals had been pried off the wall because they didn't fit the decor. Patricia Coleman stood on the porch that used to be mine and said 7 words I will never forget. "You're not Coleman blood. Get out." My father-in-law folded his arms. My husband's brothers kept carrying boxes like I wasn't even there. I didn't scream. I didn't beg. I took out my phone and called the one man Marcus told me to call if this ever happened. His lawyer answered on the first ring. "Major Martin," Charles said. "I've been expecting this call for 7 years. What none of them knew was already sealed in an envelope. Stay with me." The drive from Fort Jackson to the house on Laguerre Street takes 22 minutes. I know because I timed it for 8 years. That afternoon, I made it in 19. I still had grave dirt on the heels of my dress shoes. I turned onto our street and saw the furniture first. Our life, stacked on the front lawn like a yard sale nobody had advertised. The blue armchair. The kitchen table where Marcus and I ate takeout on paper plates the week we moved in. Boxes with my handwriting on the sides. And on the grass, near the walkway, our wedding photos lay face down in the wet October grass, glass side to the dirt. I put the car in park. I did not turn off the engine. I want you to understand that I noticed the engine was still running, and I chose to leave it because some part of me was already keeping a record. The lock on the front door was new. Brass, still bright, no weathering. Someone had changed it that morning while I was standing over a hole in the ground at Magnolia Cemetery, holding the folded flag they gave me because Marcus was a veteran too, before the vet school, before the practice. Patricia Coleman stood on the porch. My porch. 63 years old, pearls, a cardigan the color of oatmeal, and a face arranged into something patient. Behind her, through the open front door, I could see the wall in the hallway. The wall where my medals had hung. Bronze Star. 2 of them. 8 years of deployments in a shadow box Marcus built himself. The wall was bare, for small holes and a rectangle of paint slightly darker than the rest. "Those didn't fit the decor," Patricia said, following my eyes. She said it the way you'd mention the weather. I did not answer. I was counting the boxes. 14. Gerald came around the side of the house carrying my grandmother's wingback chair. The one she reupholstered herself in 1974, the one that traveled from a trailer in Sumter to 3 duty stations to this house. He set it down on the driveway like it was trash he was tired of carrying. Behind him, Raymond stood with his arms folded, 66 and satisfied, a man who had run a bank and believed the world ran on the same rules. Timothy, the youngest, 33, carried a box of my books. When our eyes met, he looked at the ground. "Molly," Patricia came to the top of the steps. "You're not Coleman blood." She let that sit. "Get out." 7 words. I have replayed them more times than I can count, and what stays with me is how ordinary her voice was. "No venom." She wasn't angry. Anger would have meant I mattered. Here is what she didn't know. 26 hours earlier, I had been in room 412 at MUSC, holding Marcus's hand while the pancreatic cancer finished what it started 9 months ago. His hand was cold before the machines admitted it. I sat with him for an hour after. A nurse named Dolores brought me coffee. I didn't drink. I had not slept. I had not eaten anything but a communion wafer at the funeral. And now I was standing on the lawn we'd planted together, being told to leave by people who had spent 8 years reminding me I didn't belong. I met Marcus at his clinic. I brought in Ranger, a retired military working dog, a Belgian Malinois with a bad hip and a service record longer than most men's. Marcus knelt on the floor to look at him instead of lifting him onto the table. That's the whole story. That's why I married him. The Colemans decided a logistics officer from a trailer in Sumter was a stain on the family tree, and they made me sign a prenup 3 weeks before the wedding, and Patricia once handed a scarf I'd knitted her to her housekeeper in front of me. Marcus fought them every time. Marcus was not here anymore. "Did you hear me?" Patricia said. "I heard you." I walked to the grass. I crouched down and turned over the nearest photo. Us at the courthouse, me in dress blues, Marcus in a gray suit, both of us laughing at something outside the frame. The glass was cracked corner to corner. I did not wipe the dirt off. I set it upright against the leg of my grandmother's chair, carefully, the way you'd prop up something living. You can take the personal items, Raymond said. We're not unreasonable people. I stood up. I looked at each of them the way I'd learned to look at a convoy route before we rolled, noting exits, noting faces, noting what would matter in the report I'd file later. Gerald, sweating. Raymond, bored. Timothy, ashamed. Patricia, certain. I did not scream. I did not beg. I have buried friends in 3 countries, and I did not learn to fall apart in front of the people who put them in the ground. I took out my phone. There was a number Marcus made me memorize 18 months ago, in the hospital, when he was still lucid enough to grip my wrist and say, "If they ever change the locks, you call this man before you do anything else. Promise me." I promised him. I dialed. It rang once. Major Martin. The voice was calm, older, unsurprised. I've been expecting this call for 7 years. He told me to breathe, to keep the phone recording, and to touch nothing. Then the line went quiet, and I stood on the lawn of the only house I had ever called mine, holding a phone against my ear like it was the last warm thing left. I want to tell you how I got here. Not the locks. The beginning. I met Marcus Coleman on a Tuesday, 6 years before the wedding, in the back exam room of a clinic that smelled like antiseptic and wet fur. I had a German shepherd named Ranger, a retired working dog with a bad hip and a way of leaning his whole weight into your leg when he was scared. Marcus knelt on the floor to greet him instead of reaching down. He let Ranger sniff his knuckles for a full minute before he touched him. "He's carried more than most people," Marcus said, running a hand along the dog's spine. "You can feel it in how he holds his shoulders." I was a captain then, stationed near Fort Jackson. I had 2 Bronze Stars in a drawer and a habit of reading people fast. This one didn't perform. That was the first thing I trusted about him. His family read me fast too, and they filed me under the wrong heading. The first dinner at the Laguerre Street house, Patricia set the table with silver that had names. Not initials. Names, engraved, of Colemans who had died before the Civil War. She asked me where my people were from, and when I said my father repaired diesel engines outside Columbia, she smiled the way you smile at a child who is drawn on the wall. "How useful," she said. Raymond leaned back and swirled his glass. "And what did your parents leave you, dear?" "A truck and a good name," I said. He laughed like I'd made a joke I didn't mean to make. 3 weeks before the wedding, a lawyer I'd never met slid a document across that same table. A prenuptial agreement. Patricia watched me the whole time, her champagne going warm in her hand. Marcus reached for the pages and she said quietly, "It protects the family, Marcus. If she loves you, she'll sign." I read all 40 pages in the kitchen alone that night, pen sweating in my grip. Then I signed. All of it. I told myself I wasn't marrying the money. I believed it. Remember that document. It comes back. The winter after we married, I knitted Patricia a scarf. Charcoal gray, cashmere, 40 hours of my hands. I am not a graceful woman with soft things, and I ruined 2 skeins learning the pattern. I wrapped it in tissue and gave it to her at Christmas. She held it up, turned it in the light, and called across the room. "Dolores, come here." The housekeeper came. Patricia laid my scarf around her shoulders. "It'll keep you warm on the drive home," she said, and went back to her wine. Dolores looked at me. She knew. I nodded once, because a woman who cleans someone else's floors should never have to carry someone else's shame. Then I went out to the porch and stood in the cold until my ears stopped ringing. Marcus found out. He always found out. That was the second thing I trusted. There was one thing about Marcus I never understood while he was alive. Once a month, sometimes twice, he'd take a folder from the clinic and say he was going to see an old friend. He never named the friend. "Where do you go, exactly?" Asked him once, watching him tuck the folder under his arm. He kissed my forehead. "Just tending to old business, mole." He came home 3 hours later lighter, like he'd set something down. I let it go. When you love someone, you leave them one closed door. I know now what was behind it. I didn't then. The sickness came the 5th year. Pancreatic. The word landed in the exam room where he usually did the healing, and I watched him take it standing up. He kept working as long as he could hold a syringe steady. The last time I heard his family speak freely, I wasn't supposed to be in the house. Marcus had been admitted that morning, MUSC, the final round. I'd driven back to Laguerre Street for his reading glasses and a clean shirt. The front door was open. I heard them in the study. Gerald's voice, low and easy. Once he's gone, she's got nothing. The prenup handles her. Then Patricia, calm as folded linen. We give it a week. Then we get her out. Quietly. No blood of ours in that house. I stood in the hallway with his glasses in my hand. I did not go in. I turned around, walked back to my car, and drove 22 minutes to the hospital, and I never told him what I heard. That night in room 412, Marcus was thin as paper, his hand cold in mine. He pulled me down close enough that I felt his breath move against my cheek. Whatever happens, he whispered, don't sign anything else. Promise me. Call Charles. I opened my mouth. Charles who? The question was right there on my tongue. His eyes had already closed. The line connected on the first ring, the way Marcus said it would. Molly. A man's voice, low, unhurried. This is Charles Patton. Where are you standing right now? I looked down. My boots were on the walkway, half on brick, half on grass wet from the morning sprinklers. 14 boxes on the lawn. My wedding photo face down near the azaleas. On the front lawn, I said. Laguerre Street. They changed the locks. Good. Stay there. Do not step off that property line, do you understand me? Not for a coffee. Not for the bathroom. You are the legal resident. The moment you leave, they will say you abandoned it. A car door thunked on his end. I'm on Broad now. 19 minutes, less if the bridge is clear. One more thing. Your phone. Start recording. Everything they touch. Everything they say. Wide. Steady, don't narrate. And Molly, a pause. Do not sign anything. If they hand you paper, let it fall on the grass. Understood, I said. It was the first word all day that felt like mine. I lifted the phone and started filming. Raymond, in his gray Sunday cardigan, carrying a lamp with both hands like it might accuse him. Gerald wiping his palms on his slacks. The little red light in the corner of my screen. I have stood in supply tents at Fort Jackson and counted pallets under worse pressure than this. My hands did not shake. Gerald saw the phone first. Put that away. He came off the porch steps fast, gravel crunching. He stopped 4 feet from me, close enough that I could smell his cologne, the same one from the funeral. You think that little movie helps you? Give me the clinic keys. Now. No, I said. That building is Coleman property. My brother's practice. He held out his hand, fingers curling. You walk in there, that's breaking and entering. I will have a squad car put you in cuffs on Church Street in front of God and everybody. Behind him, Patricia arranged herself on the top step like a woman posing for a portrait. She wouldn't know what to do with a clinic anyway, she said to no one. You can put a girl in an officer's uniform. You cannot teach her which fork. I kept the camera on Gerald's hand. And you can quit stalling, Gerald went on, quieter now, glancing at the neighbors' windows. The riverfront lot's already got a buyer. Paperwork's moving Monday. So all this, he waved at the boxes at me, at the life on the grass. It's happening whether you film it or not. I filed that away the way I file coordinates. Riverfront lot. A buyer. Monday. Marcus had never once mentioned selling anything. 6 years married, and he told me about a rescued barn owl before he'd have hidden a land sale. Gerald spoke about it like a man who needed it to be true this week and not next. That was when I saw my wedding photo again. The glass cracked, Marcus's face pressed into mud from the sprinkler line. I crouched and lifted it out of the wet grass with both hands, the way Raymond was holding that lamp. Wiped the mud off Marcus's cheek with my thumb. On the day this was taken, he had leaned in and whispered that his family would test me and that I should never let them see me flinch. I was not flinching. Timothy took one step toward me. Just one. His mouth opened. Let me, he started. His hand actually reached, like he might help me carry it. Timothy. Gerald didn't even turn his head. Get the ottoman. Timothy's hand dropped. He looked at the grass, at his own shoes, at anything but me. He went and got the ottoman. But he'd taken the step. I saw it, and I think he knew I saw it. I set the photo upright against the porch rail, out of the mud, and turned the camera back on. A patrol car rolled to the curb, no lights, just the slow crunch of tires. 2 officers. The younger one had his notepad already out. Somewhere down the block a screen door had been watching us all morning, and now it had made its call. Afternoon, the older officer said. Nameplate, T. Reyes. He looked at the boxes, the lamp, the woman in a black funeral dress holding a phone. We got a report of a disturbance. Anybody want to tell me what's going on here? Everyone talked at once. Patricia said trespasser. Gerald said theft. Raymond said family matter, the 2 words men like him used to make police disappear. Officer Reyes raised one hand, and it all stopped. One at a time. He turned to me. Mom. You live here? I do, I said. My husband was buried yesterday. I came home to change locks and my belongings on the lawn. Reyes's eyes moved to the boxes, to the 2 bronze stars sitting loose on top of a shoebox where somebody had unscrewed them from my wall. Something in his jaw shifted. Okay. He clicked his pen. Whose name is on this house? Who's the legal owner of this property? For half a second, nobody moved. Then the Colemans answered together, one voice, rehearsed as a hymn. We are. Reyes wrote it down. And at the mouth of the lane, past the live oaks, an old Mercedes slowed and stopped at the curb. Silver, a decade out of style, one headlight rimmed with rust. The engine cut. Nobody inside moved to get out just yet. I lowered the phone an inch. 19 minutes. On the nose. The car door didn't slam. That was the first thing I noticed. Every other man in this family let doors announce them. This one eased the door shut with 2 fingers, like he was closing an incubator. Charles Peton was shorter than his voice on the phone. Gray suit, no tie, a leather satchel he did not open. He crossed the lawn between the boxes without hurrying, stepped around the wedding photo still face down in the grass, and stopped in front of Officer Reyes. Charles Peton, he said. I represented Dr. Marcus Coleman for 12 years. I'd like you to note the time, officer. And the 14 boxes on the lawn. Reyes looked at his watch. Wrote something. Patricia came off the porch. This is a family matter, Charles. You of all people know that. I know a great deal, Patricia. He said her first, name the way you'd set down a cup you didn't want to break. Then he turned to Reyes again. Officer, may I ask under what authority the locks on this house were changed? Gerald stepped in. It's our family home. Been Coleman property since our grandfather bought it in 1961. Charles nodded slowly, like a man agreeing to something he had no intention of agreeing to. That's a lovely story. Whose name is on the deed? The lawn went quiet. Somewhere down Laguerre Street, a sprinkler ticked on. I felt the wet grass through the seam of my shoe and did not move. Ours, Raymond said. His banker's voice. Flat, final, the voice that had closed 1,000 loans. It's held in the family trust. Is it? Charles said. Not a question. He let it sit there. I want to tell you, I felt something sore in that moment. I didn't. I felt the way I feel 40 seconds before a convoy rolls, steady, cold, counting. I learned a long time ago that the people who yell are the people who've already lost. Charles wasn't yelling. Here's what I'd suggest. He addressed the whole porch now. There are documents that speak to ownership of this property and to a few other things. I don't think a front lawn at 7 in the evening is the place to read them. City Hall opens at 8:30. Bring your own attorney. Bring the trust paperwork you just mentioned, Raymond. We'll lay it all on one table and see what's true. You're bluffing, Gerald said. You've got nothing but a dead man and a widow who married up. Married up. Charles turned to look at me for the first time. Pale eyes, tired at the corners. Major Martin, is it? Yes. 2 tours, I'm told. Logistics. 2 bronze stars. He said it to Gerald without looking at Gerald. This woman moved fuel and blood and body armor across a desert. I imagine she can carry 14 boxes back inside when the time comes. Timothy laughed. One short sound, then he caught it and stared at his shoes. Patricia's head snapped toward him, and he went still. 8:30, Charles said. City Hall. Anyone who isn't there tomorrow forfeits the right to complain about what's decided. He paused. There's a provision in Dr. Coleman's estate that some of you should read very carefully before you spend another dollar you think is coming. Automatic. Right of survivorship. Look it up tonight. Right of survivorship. The words meant nothing to me yet. I filed them anyway, the way I filed everything that night, in the flat, clean drawer where I keep the things I'll need later. Raymond's jaw worked. This is theater, Charles. It's a Tuesday, Charles said. He looked around at the boxes, the medals unhooked and stacked on the walk, my grandmother's chair, the one she'd had reupholstered in 1974, sitting in the driveway like a throne somebody dragged to the curb. You changed the locks 26 hours after this woman held her husband's hand while he died. I'd think hard, tonight, about how that sounds when it's read aloud. Read aloud. I watched his coat when he said it. His hand drifted to his left breast pocket and pressed there once, the way you check for a passport, and then came away. There was something flat and rectangular under that gray wool. He never mentioned it. He buttoned the coat. Reyes cleared his throat. Folks, I'm going to need everyone off this property tonight except whoever the deed says lives here. And right now nobody here can show me a deed. So the house stays locked, nobody enters, and we sort it in the morning. Patricia's mouth opened and closed. Major, Charles said to me quietly, you're not sleeping in a hotel your husband would be ashamed of. There's a room at the Vendu held under my name. I'll walk you to your car. I picked up the wedding photo before I left. Wiped the glass on my sleeve. Nobody stopped me. At my car, he didn't hand me directions. As the engine turned over and I reached to pull the door shut, he pressed a small brass key into my palm. Older than the others on my ring, worn smooth, an old copper thing. Marcus told me, he said, voice low so the porch couldn't hear, if it ever came to this day, you open drawer number 3 at the clinic. Tonight. Before they think to. The clinic sat dark on Ashley Avenue, and I parked 2 blocks down out of old habit, the same way I'd stage a vehicle before a route I didn't trust. Marcus and I had built that lot together, planted the crepe myrtles along the fence the spring after we married. Now I walked past them with a brass key sweating in my fist, listening for anything that wasn't crickets. The back door took the key on the second try. The lock was newer than the door. I noticed that and filed it away. Inside it smelled like it always had. Antiseptic and dog and the faint sweet rot of the treat jar behind the counter. I didn't turn on the overheads. I used my phone, hood over the screen, and moved down the hall past the exam rooms to his office. Ranger's old shoe toy still sat on the windowsill, where Marcus kept it after we lost him. I made myself walk past that too. The cabinet against the far wall had 5 drawers. Cabinet 3 from the top. I'd counted wrong my whole life, apparently because I opened it and my knees stopped working right, and I had to sit down in his chair. It wasn't files the way a drawer holds files. It was a system. Tabs. Dates going back 7 years, in his slanted, careful print, the same hand that wrote prescriptions no pharmacist could read, but he could. I lifted the first folder with 2 fingers like it might come apart. Date. The house on Laguerre. And there, on the second page, a phrase I'd hear a lawyer say out loud in less than 12 hours. Joint tenancy, with right of survivorship. My name typed beside his. Dated 4 years ago. I had been at Fort Jackson that week. He told me he was meeting an old friend. There was the clinic. Same language. Same signature. Same life folded around it, gentle as tissue paper. There was the river parcel out past Wapu. The land Gerald was so sure belonged to the bloodline, he could sell it out from under a corpse. My name on that one too. I want to tell you, I felt triumphant. I didn't. I felt the specific nausea of a person realizing how much fear the man she loved had carried alone, in the car, on all those quiet drives he called nothing. Every old friend. Every month he vanished into. He hadn't been slipping away from me. He'd been building a wall around me one brick at a time, so I'd never see the mortar. Under the deeds was a single sheet, handwritten, no letterhead. A note to himself, or maybe to me. It read, "They came to 412 on the 9th. Wanted the will reopened while I could still hold a pen." I said no. Timothy was in the room. Ask him. The 9th. He'd died on the 11th. I read it twice. Then I set it face down on the desk, the way you cover a wound so you can keep working. Beneath the note, taped to the folder's inside flap, was a small black USB drive. My hands were steady. I want that on the record. They were steady. They were in officer's hands. They did not shake as I pushed it into the laptop he kept charged for exactly no reason I'd ever understood until now. One audio file. For minutes, 19 seconds. Recorded 8 months ago, when he could still fill his lungs. I put in one earbud. I don't know why one. Maybe so half of me stayed on watch. Molly. Just my name, and the room I was sitting in reorganized itself around his voice. If you're hearing this, it means they did the thing we both knew they'd do. And it means you did the smart thing and didn't burn the place down. A breath. A dry, tired laugh I'd have given a year of my life to answer. Charles has the originals. The house, the clinic, the river, they're already yours. They were yours the second I stopped breathing. No signature they wave in your face can touch it. And Molly, listen, the will has a clause. Anyone who contests, anyone who drags you into a courtroom to fight for what's yours, loses their share. All of it. To the last dollar. I built it that way on purpose. Let them reach for it. The reaching is what takes it away. I pressed the heel of my hand against my mouth. The clinic was so quiet I could hear the refrigerator in the lab cycle on. There's a letter, he went on. Sealed. Charles knows when. Don't open it early. Promise me you'll let him read it in the room, with all of them there. They need to hear it in their own house, from a dead man, in front of witnesses. The recording thinned. He was tired even in memory. One more thing, and this is the part one needs you to actually hear, not just win. A pause long enough that I checked the file hadn't stopped. Don't turn this place into a fortress to defend. I have a different plan for you. The file ended. 4:19. Silence rushed back in like water. I sat with the earbud still in, staring at the crepe myrtle shadows on the wall, trying to figure out what he meant by a different plan, because Marcus never said a thing like that without meaning something exact. That's when the front door lock turned. Not the back, the front, the newer one, someone with a key. Fluorescent light snapped on down the hall and burned my eyes white. Gerald stood in the doorway, phone already up, red recording, glowing. Well, he said, look who's stealing. I didn't move away from the open drawer. That was the mistake, and I knew it the second I saw the red light on his phone. Put that down, I said. My voice came out level. Kitchen order level. This is my husband's clinic. Gerald smiled behind the screen. He walked a slow half-circle, filming the drawer, the folder in my hands, the amber pill bottles on the counter that had nothing to do with anything. He said, was his clinic. He got close enough that I could smell bourbon and cold cigarette. Breaking and entering. Handling records that aren't yours. You've been busy, Major. I set the folder down on the exam table, flat, and stepped back with my hands where the camera could see them. 8 years of the Army teaches you that the person holding the recording device has already decided how the story ends. I let him have his footage. I did not let him have a reaction. I have a key, I said, to a place you don't own. He backed toward the door, still filming, like he thought I'd lunge. See you at City Hall. The stainless table was cold under my palm. I stood there long after his taillights swung out of the gravel lot, and I listened to the compressor hum in the wall, and I did not pick the folder back up. Something told me not to touch it again. I was right, and I would learn exactly how right in about 9 hours. Charles called me at 6:40 the next morning. I already knew from his voice. He filed, Charles said. 2 things. A criminal complaint, vandalism, theft of records. And he gave a statement to a reporter at the Post and Courier. A pause I could hear him choosing. The statement says you isolated a dying man and pressured him to sign his family out of their inheritance. I was standing at the window of the rented room he'd put me in, watching a sprinkler tick across a lawn that wasn't mine. That's a lie. It doesn't have to be true to be a problem. He said it gently, which was worse. Molly, there's more. Their attorney is a man named Bell. He's already circulated the prenuptial agreement. 40 pages. Your signature on every one. He let that land. Bell is calling it a written promise. He's saying you agreed, in your own hand, 3 weeks before the wedding, to claim nothing of the Coleman estate. I closed my eyes. I could still feel the pen that day, the heavy cream paper, Patricia watching from across the table while I signed 40 pages and thanked them for it. I had signed it because Marcus asked me to, because I loved him, because I had nothing and they had everything, and I wanted them to stop looking at me the way you look at a stain on a good rug. You told me the joint ownership makes that document meaningless, I said. I did tell you that. Charles didn't dodge. And I believe it. The survivorship deeds transfer outside the estate. They don't care what the prenup says, because the house and the clinic and the land were never Marcus's to leave. The moment he died, they were already yours. A breath. But there's a difference between what's true and what I can prove in a room full of people who have known the Colemans for 40 years.
Come to the office, he said. Come now.
Don't talk to anyone. His office smelled like paper and old coffee. He had the folder from drawer 3 spread across his desk. I'd handed it to him at dawn, and I watched him look at it the way a surgeon looks at an X-ray he doesn't like. This is real, Charles said, tapping the deeds. This is airtight. Then he set his hand flat over the small silver drive. This is not. That's Marcus. For minutes and 19 seconds of his voice. That's a recording obtained by a woman who entered a building at night, using a key nobody can prove was given to her, the night before a hearing. He looked at me over his glasses. Bell will move to exclude it in the first 10 minutes. And any judge in Charleston will grant it. It looks like exactly what Gerald filmed it looking like. He didn't apologize. I respected him for that. If we walk in leaning on that audio, we hand them the story that you manufactured all of it. For the first time since I'd found the 14 boxes on the grass, I felt the floor tilt. I had been so certain. Marcus had built a wall, brick by brick, for 7 years, and I had believed the wall would hold on its own. I sat down without deciding to. So we lose, I said.
No.
Charles pulled a legal pad toward him and drew a single line down the middle. The survivorship clause voids that prenup. A promise not to inherit means nothing when there's nothing to inherit because the property already passed to you. That's the law, and I'll win it. His pen stopped. But to win the room, the reporters, the people who matter to them, I need something the audio can't give me. I need a witness.
Someone inside that family.
Someone who is in room 412 on the 9th and will say out loud what happened. I thought of Marcus's note. Ask Timothy. Charles saw my face change and went very still. There is one person in the Coleman family, he said, who knows the truth about the night Marcus was dying. If that person is willing to speak, we win. He held my eyes. If they aren't, you lose everything. Charles set his coffee down without drinking it. Then we stop guessing, he said, and we go find out what they actually need. We worked out of a rented office off Broad Street, 2 folding tables, and a printer that jammed every 10 pages. Charles had spent 40 years reading Charleston the way I read a supply manifest. He knew which clerk kept the old plat books, which register let you pull deeds without an appointment. By noon we had 11 pages spread across the table, and my thumb kept returning to one line highlighted in yellow. Read it again, I said. Purchase and sale agreement, Charles said. Signed by Gerald Coleman, seller. Coastal Ridge Holdings, buyer. 16 acres riverfront, off the Wando. He tapped the corner. Executed 9 weeks ago. Before Marcus died. 9 weeks. Marcus was still walking then. Still driving himself to the clinic on his good mornings, the ones where the pain let go long enough for him to pretend. He sold land that wasn't his, I said. He sold land he believed was his. Charles slid a second sheet across. This is the family's assumption, that the riverfront came down through the Colemans, grandfather to sons. It didn't. Marcus put it in joint tenancy with you 4 years ago. He let that sit. Gerald never checked the deed. Why would he? Nobody in that family thought a Martin could ever hold Coleman ground. There was a sourness at the back of my throat, and I swallowed it. On the wall behind Charles, a clock ticked with a loose second hand. I counted 10 of them before I spoke. How deep is he in? Charles didn't answer with a number. He answered with a folder. Gerald's brokerage, 3 years of filings, a pattern I could read even without a law degree. 2 mortgages on his house on trad. A line of credit maxed in March. A default notice from a lender in Colombia dated the same week Marcus was admitted to 412. He needed liquidity, Charles said quietly.
Fast.
Marcus's death gave the family a reason to clear the Laguerre house, but the timing wasn't grief. It was a deadline.
He looked at me.
Coastal Ridge wired Gerald a deposit. $200,000 held in escrow, releasing on clean title. $200,000 against land he couldn't legally sell. That was the shape of it, then. Not hatred, exactly. Hatred was the paint. Underneath was a man drowning, and a family that would rather throw a soldier's medals on the lawn, my 2 bronze stars in the grass beside 14 boxes, than admit the money was already gone. I set my phone on the table and turned it face up. I want to hear Raymond say it. Charles didn't stop me. He only reached over and pressed record on the app and nodded once, the way you nod at someone about to walk a live route. Raymond answered on the 3rd ring, and I could hear ice against glass. Molly. My name in his mouth had always sounded like a receipt he didn't want to sign. Raymond. I have a question about the Wando property. A pause. The ice again. That's family land. It isn't your concern. I understand the family means to sell it. The sale is handled. Clipped. Certain. Gerald has it in order. The buyer's been patient enough. The deposit's been sitting since spring, and I won't have you complicating a closing over some grievance. There it was. He'd said it plainly, without knowing what he was standing on. The deposit's been sitting since spring. I looked at Charles. His pen had stopped moving. So, you knew about Coastal Ridge, I said. Another pause, shorter, and something changed in his breathing, the way a man realizes the floor has a hole in it a half-second after his weight is already there. This conversation is over, Raymond said, and the line went dead. Charles stopped the recording. He sat back. He looked, for the first time since the Mercedes, almost gentle. He confirmed knowledge of the sale, he said. On his own tongue. That matters at City Hall. He wrote a date on the folder tab and underlined it twice. But I was already ahead of him, and what I saw made me go cold in a different way. I pulled the purchase agreement back toward me and read the release clause a 3rd time. Charles, if the title doesn't clear, and it can't because it's mine, the sale collapses. Yes. And the deposit. He understood before I finished. Coastal Ridge will demand the deposit back. Gerald spent it. He's already spent it, the Columbia default, the March draw. Charles took off his glasses and pressed 2 fingers to the bridge of his nose. If this land deal dies, Gerald doesn't just lose a commission. He's exposed for selling property he had no right to. That's not embarrassment. That's a forged conveyance. He put the glasses back on. It's bankruptcy and possibly a warrant. I looked at the 11 pages. At the yellow line. At a family that had changed the locks 26 hours after their son stopped breathing because the arithmetic couldn't wait. I should have felt something like triumph. What I felt was tired. I drove back to the rented room past midnight. The streetlights on Broad came up one at a time as I passed under them, like a runway. I was pulling off my boots when the phone buzzed on the nightstand. Not a call. A text. I turned it over.
Timothy. We need to talk.
Don't tell anyone. The text came at 11:40 that night. I was sitting in the borrowed apartment Charles had arranged on Church Street, holding a mug of tea gone cold, when the second message arrived. An address. A diner on Meeting Street called the Blue Marlin. Open until 2. And 1 line under it. Come alone. Back booth. I put on Marcus's old canvas jacket because it still smelled faintly of the clinic, of antiseptic and dog, and I drove the 14 minutes across town. The parking lot was nearly empty. Through the fogged window, I could see one figure hunched in the last booth, turning a coffee cup a quarter-inch at a time, never drinking it. Timothy looked up when the bell over the door rang. His hands were shaking. I had seen those hands stay perfectly steady across 8 years of family dinners while his mother said cruel things, and he said nothing.
Sit, he said. Please.
Facing the door. So you can see if anyone comes.
Iset.
The vinyl was cracked and cold. A waitress drifted over, and I ordered coffee I did not want, and when she left, Timothy leaned forward and lowered his voice to almost nothing.
I was there, he said.
Room 412. The 9th. I kept my hands flat on the table. Go on. They waited until you went to the cafeteria. Mom brought a lawyer. Not Belle, someone else, a notary type. Dad had the new will already printed. They put the pen in Marcus's hand. His throat worked.
He was on the morphine.
He could barely hold it. And he still said no. He said it twice. The second time, he dropped the pen on the floor on purpose so Dad had to bend down and get it, and Marcus said. Timothy's voice cracked. He said, "She earned it. You never did." Outside, a car passed and its headlights swept the window, and Timothy flinched like a man expecting his brother's face in the glass. Why are you telling me this now? I asked. He turned the coffee cup another quarter-inch. Because I'm tired, he said. I've been the disappointment for 33 years. Gerald's the golden one, and I'm the one they compare him against. And Marcus, he stopped. He pressed the heel of his hand against his eyes. You don't know this. Marcus paid Dylan's tuition. My son, 3 years at Porter God, $12,000 a year, quietly, into an account so I wouldn't have to ask Dad and get told no with a smile. He never told anyone. He made me promise not to tell you either. I'm breaking that now because he's dead, and I'm sick of owing everyone but him. I had not known. I sat with it a moment, the way you set down something heavy without dropping it. There's more, I said. It wasn't a question. Gerald forged the signatures, Timothy said. On the Coastal Ridge paperwork. He signed Dad's name, and he swallowed. He signed a page of the will. The old one, the one that would have cut you out. He thought he'd destroyed the original after they failed in the hospital. He shredded a copy. He doesn't know there was a real one. The coffee arrived. Neither of us touched it. The steam rose between us and thinned to nothing. I need you to say all of this tomorrow, I said. At City Hall. In front of a notary. His jaw tightened. You know what they'll do to me. Mom will make sure Dylan never sees a cent. Gerald will. Gerald doesn't play clean, Molly. If he finds out I talked to you before I got up there, he'll get to me first. Bury it. Say I'm lying for money. Then what do you want? Protect my family, he said. Whatever happens to me, Dylan's schooling doesn't stop. Sarah keeps the house. You put it in writing with Charles, tonight, and I'll stand up and say every word. I thought about how my whole life had trained me to distrust the man who waits until the last night to switch sides. I thought about Marcus dropping a pen on the floor so his father would have to kneel. Charles draws it up in the morning before 8, I said. You have my word, and I don't give it twice. Timothy nodded. Then he reached into the inside of his coat and drew out a manila envelope, soft and creased from being carried against his body. He slid it across the table under his palm, slowly, so nobody at the counter would see. Don't open it here, he said. I lifted the corner. Inside was a single sheet of heavy paper, older stock, with a familiar signature line, and Marcus's real signature, and below it, in a hand that leaned too hard to the right, Raymond's name written by someone who was not Raymond. That's the will page Gerald thinks he shredded, Timothy said. I took it out of the file before he got to it. I don't even know why. I think I always knew this day was coming. I pressed the envelope flat against the table with both hands to keep them still. Tomorrow at City Hall, he said, standing, dropping a 5 on the table for coffee he never drank. Don't let them see me arrive. Don't look for me. I'll walk in on my own. The conference room on the second floor of City Hall smelled of floor wax and cold coffee. I got there at 8:15. Charles was already at the long table, a black binder squared to the edge, his reading glasses folded beside it. A notary named Ms. Okonkwo sat at the end with a stamp and a ledger. Officer Reyes stood near the door in uniform, hands folded. And along the back wall, in their good clothes, sat 4 people I recognized from 30 years of Charleston Christmas cards, the kind of people Patricia lived to impress. They filed in at 8:30 exactly. Raymond first, then Patricia in gray, then Gerald, and their attorney Belle with a briefcase. Timothy's chair stayed empty. I watched Gerald notice that, and I watched him smile. "Shall we?" Belle said, unbuttoning his jacket. "My clients would like this brief. Major Martin trespassed at the clinic. She stole records. And there is a 40-page prenuptial agreement in which she waived any claim to Coleman property. This is, frankly, a formality." Charles didn't reach for the binder. He reached for a single sheet. "Then let's begin with the property," he said. "The house on Laguerre Street. Purchased 1961. Titled, since 11 years ago, as joint tenancy with right of survivorship. Grantor, Marcus Coleman. Grantee, Molly Martin." He slid copies down the table. "The clinic. Same instrument. The 16 acres on the river. Same instrument." Belle's pen stopped. "Right of survivorship," Charles said, "means the property never entered the estate. There was nothing to inherit, nothing to contest. At the moment of Marcus's death, at 11:02 in the evening on the 11th, all 3 parcels passed to Major Martin automatically. Not by will, by operation of law." He looked at Belle over his glasses. "A prenuptial agreement governs division of marital assets. It does not and cannot sever a survivorship tenancy. Your 40 pages are eloquent. They are also irrelevant." Patricia's chin came up. "Marcus would never sign away his family's house without telling us." "He signed it," Charles said, "and asked me not to tell you. I honored that for 11 years. I'm honoring it now." That was when the door opened. Timothy came in without looking at anyone. He set a manila folder on the table in front of Charles, then sat, finally, in the empty chair. Gerald's smile was gone. "Mr. Peton has a witness," the notary said, reading her sheet.
Ida.
Charles turned. "Timothy, on the 9th of the month, were you present in room 412 at MUSC?" Timothy's voice was low, but it didn't shake.
"Yes."
All of us were. Marcus was awake. We asked him to change his will, to put the land back to the family. He said no. Mother said he wasn't thinking clearly. He said he'd never thought more clearly in his life. He put his hand flat on the folder. "And this is a page of an old will," Gerald told everyone he shredded. He didn't. He kept it and traced Marcus's signature onto the land contract. That's Gerald's handwriting in the downstroke. I watched him practice it. Gerald stood so fast his chair barked against the floor. "You little." "Sit down, Mr. Coleman," Reyes said from the door. Gerald sat. I hadn't said one word yet. I found that I didn't need to. 8 years of biting my tongue at that woman's dinner table, and now the room did the biting for me. Charles reached into his jacket and set his phone on the table. "There's one more thing. A phone call 3 nights ago." He pressed play. Raymond's voice filled the room, tinny and unmistakable. My own voice asking, calm, whether he'd known about the sale of the river land. And Raymond, impatient, certain no one was writing anything down. Of course I knew about the sale. Gerald needed the liquidity. We all did. That's why we couldn't wait on the girl. The girl. In a room full of people he'd spent his life needing to impress. One of the back wall women made a small sound and looked at her lap. Raymond's face went the color of ash. Patricia turned to him slowly, and for the first time in 8 years, I saw her look at her husband as though he'd tracked mud across her carpet. That was recorded without consent. Belle tried. "South Carolina is a one-party consent state," Charles said mildly. Major Martin was a party to the call. "It's admissible, but we won't need to argue it long." He set the phone down and drew out the last thing. The flat envelope. A cream-colored, sealed with wax the deep red of a clinic's exam room floor, Marcus's thumbprint pressed into it. I had watched Charles carry that against his chest for 3 days. I hadn't known it was this. "Marcus left instructions," Charles said, that this be read aloud, in full, in the presence of his family, only if his family did the thing he prayed they would not do. He looked down the table at each of them. "You have done it." He broke the seal. The paper was heavier than ordinary paper. I know, because I watched it bend under its own weight as he lifted it. "To my mother," Charles read. "You gave the scarf my wife knitted for you to Dolores while Molly watched, because you wanted her to see her place. She never had a place with you. She had a place with me." He turned the page. "To my father, you taught me that money settles everything. Watch it settle nothing today." His voice did not rise. That was the terrible part. It stayed level as a spirit line. "To Gerald, I know about the signature. I knew before you did it. You were always going to."
A breath.
"To Timothy, you were in that room, and you were ashamed. Shame is not nothing. Use it." Timothy pressed the heel of his hand to his eyes. "And to all of you," Charles read, "the contest clause is real. Any heir who challenges this arrangement forfeits every dollar and every acre otherwise owed to them. You have already challenged it. You changed the locks. It is already done." He steadied the page. "This house was built as a fortress, to keep people out. I mean for Molly to make it a lighthouse, to bring them in." Belle had stopped writing entirely. Charles turned to the final page. He held it a moment, and I saw him decide to read even the closing line, the one Marcus had meant for their faces. "If you are hearing this," he read, "it means you have done exactly the thing I begged you would never do." Nobody moved. Nobody breathed. In that silence I heard, very clearly, the crack and spill of Patricia's water glass slipping from her hand onto the floor. The judge's ruling came 3 days later, printed on paper heavier than the 14 boxes had weighed on my lawn. Charles set it on my kitchen table and read one line aloud. "Any party contesting shall forfeit all claim." He looked at me over his glasses. "They contested for 6 days. So they forfeit everything they moved, including the labor of moving it back." I didn't smile. I made coffee. On the morning it happened, a truck I didn't recognize idled at the curb on Laguerre. Then a second one. Patricia came up the walk first, in gray slacks and no jewelry, holding one end of a lamp. Raymond held the other. They set it inside my door without a word and went back for more. I stood on the porch, where she had stood a week ago. I let her come to me. That was the only thing I took. "Where does this go?" Gerald asked. He had a scrape on his knuckle and a box marked kitchen in my own handwriting.
He would not look at me.
"Wherever you found it," I said. He carried it in. The court had ordered them to return each item to its original position, and a bonded inventory clerk named Ms. Okafor stood in my hall with a clipboard, checking off 211 lines. Photographs.
Books.
A cast-iron pan. The 2 bronze stars in their frames, which Timothy carried in both hands like they might break. I stepped in front of him and took the frames. "I've got them," I told him. He nodded and let go, and for a moment his jaw worked like a boy about to say sorry. He didn't. He went back out to the truck. The last piece was the armchair. My grandmother had reupholstered it in 1974, a green so faded now it was almost the color of dust. It took Raymond and Gerald together to lift it. 66 years old, Raymond was, and I watched him back up my 3 porch steps, carrying the chair of a woman he had called, at my wedding, the Helps furniture. He set it down in the corner where it had lived for 8 years. He was breathing hard. A thread of sweat ran into his collar. He straightened, and for 1 second I thought he might speak. He didn't. He walked out. Here is the thing nobody tells you about winning. It is very quiet. There is no music. There is a stranger with a clipboard and the sound of a truck backing up. Beep, beep, beep in the June heat. By noon the houses on Laguerre had their curtains open. Mrs. Ferris across the street watered a garden that did not need watering. In Charleston, the drawing rooms carry news faster than any wire, and by the weekend I understood the whole peninsula knew that the Colemans had carried a soldier's furniture up her steps by hand. Raymond had spent 40 years believing money bought silence. He was learning what it cost. Gerald's deal collapsed the same week. The 16 riverfront acres he had sold to Coastal Ridge were never his. The earnest money was already spent.
Coastal Ridge Sud.
Then the solicitor's office opened a file on the forged signature Timothy had handed me. I did not celebrate that either. I had watched a man drown in water he poured himself. The envelope came on a Tuesday. Cream stock, Raymond's bank-heavy handwriting, no return address.
Inside, a check.
$100,000 payable to Molly Martin and a single line on the memo. For your trouble. Below it, on a separate card, we hope this puts the unpleasantness behind us. The unpleasantness. As if Marcus were an inconvenient smell. I read the card twice. Then I set it face down and finished my coffee because I had learned from these people how a person tells you exactly who they are, and I believe them now. That evening I carried the check out to the garden. I had a book of matches from the late-night diner where Timothy had told me the truth. I held the check by one corner and struck a match. The flame took the memo line first. For your trouble curled and browned, and was gone. I folded the ash into an envelope, sealed it, and addressed it to Raymond in my own steady hand. No note. He was fluent in the language of things returned untouched. His mother had taught me that with a cashmere scarf. I mailed it Wednesday. Patricia never called. Through all of it, through the clerk and the chair and the trucks, she said not one word to me. The woman who had stood on my porch and told me what blood I was not made of stood in my hall a week later and was silent. I did not need her to speak. Silence from Patricia was its own kind of confession. I kept my promise to Timothy. When the solicitor asked whether he had known about the forgery, I gave a sworn statement that he came forward on his own, at risk to himself. His name stayed clean. His son stayed in school. That Saturday, I hung the 2 bronze stars back on the wall where Marcus had first mounted them, measuring twice, marking the plaster with a pencil the way he used to. I stepped back. Level. They caught the afternoon light. Then I opened the last box the clerk had left in the corner. Under a layer of my grandmother's linens, wedged against the side, was an envelope no lawyer had sealed. Marcus's handwriting. Words on the front in his own hand. Open when the anger has cooled. I waited 6 months to open it. I know that sounds strange. Charles told me later he'd never seen anyone hold a sealed letter that long. But Marcus had written the instruction himself, and I trusted the man who spent 7 years building me a door out. So the second envelope sat inside the same drawer where the first one had lived, and I let the anger burn down to something I could stand next to. On a Tuesday in February, I finally sat at the kitchen table on Laguerre Street and slid my thumb under the flap. The paper was heavier than ordinary stationery. I remember thinking he must have bought it on purpose, so it would feel like something when the day came. His handwriting had gone thin near the end. I could see where the pen dragged.
Molly.
If you're reading this, you've already won. Now, the harder part. Don't turn this place into a fort. You've spent your whole life defending things. Build a lighthouse instead. Point it at whoever's still out on the water. I read it twice. Then I set it face up, which is a thing I never do, and I went and stood in the front room where the 2 bronze stars were back on the wall. I'd hung them myself the week after City Hall. Our wedding photo went back on the mantel the same afternoon, the frame still faintly scratched from its night in the grass. For weeks I'd told myself I kept them up out of spite. Standing there with his letter in my hand, I understood that wasn't it, and had never been it. The next morning I called the sign company. It took 9 days to fabricate. When the truck came, I made them wait while I photographed the old lettering one last time, then let them pry it down. The new sign went up at 11 in the morning, brushed steel, plain font, nothing gold on it because Marcus hated gold. Marcus Coleman Memorial Veterinary Hospital. The receptionist, Denise, cried a little. I did not, but I stood across the street the way I'd stood across from that house in July, memorizing it, except this time there was nothing to survive. We opened the Veterans Program the same week. Any service member, active or retired, brings a pet. We treat it no invoice. I set aside a fund for it out of the clinic's own margins. I did not touch a cent of the land. The 16 riverfront acres sit exactly as they were the day Marcus died, and I've told the county I'll deed them to a working dog rescue before I ever let a developer near the water. Timothy started in March. He isn't a vet. He runs the back office, orders supplies, calls families when the news is bad, because it turns out he's better at that than anyone I've ever hired. His son, the one Marcus quietly put through school, comes in on Saturdays and mops the kennels for pocket money. I kept my promise. Gerald tried, once, to drag Timothy into the fraud investigation as a co-signer. Charles ended that in a single letter. Timothy has not spoken to his mother since the hearing, and he doesn't talk about it, and I don't ask. Patricia I saw exactly once more. It was outside the Harris Teeter on Broad, both of us reaching for the same cart corral. She looked at me the way you look at weather. She opened her mouth. Whatever line she'd carried in her pocket for 63 years, she couldn't find the shape of it, and she closed her mouth and walked to her car. That was the whole conversation. I've thought about it more than I'd like to admit. Here is the part one want you to hear, because it's the part one almost got wrong. For a few weeks after the check burned in my sink, I kept a list. Every cruelty, itemized, the way I'd been trained to log a convoy. The scarf, 40 hours of my hands they gave to Dolores like a joke. The 40 pages of prenup they made me sign 3 weeks before the wedding. I thought if I kept the ledger clean enough, one day it would balance. It never balances. That's the trick nobody warns you about. You can win every ruling, get every apology returned as ash, and the scale still doesn't move, because the thing you're weighing was never money. What moved it was a golden retriever named Biscuit whose owner did 2 tours in Kandahar and couldn't cover the surgery. We fixed his hip on a Thursday. The man shook my hand at the desk and couldn't get a word out, and I understood, finally, what Marcus had been trying to hand me from the far side of everything. They wanted to make me a Coleman. I'm a Martin. I always was. I still keep both envelopes in the drawer. Some nights I take out the second one and read the last line, the one about the water, and then I put it back and turn off the lights over a clinic that treats the dogs of people who gave everything and got told they were nothing. He was right. Don't build the fort. Build the light and leave it on.